Hey guys, and welcome to this week's episode of D3 Live. So today I'm going to be talking about a really big topic. It's going to be Android versus iOS versus Windows Phone 7 versus webOS. Now I've been very fortunate enough to be able to use all four of these platforms pretty extensively over the past month. In fact, I've got a couple of the phones right here. And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons of each operating system. So unlike, when you're buying a computer, you go, okay, well, I'm going to buy Windows or Mac. It's basically really simple. If you're buying a phone, there are a lot of choices. And indeed, there are even more than what I'm talking about, including BlackBerry and several others. But what I'm going to be focusing on are the four major, in my opinion, platforms, of course, being webOS and etc., etc., etc. So the first one I want to start with is webOS, since I've just happen to have a Veer right here. webOS is a fantastic operating system. It's been around for a couple of years, but it's got, if any of you guys have ever used it, you'll know that it's a fantastic operating system. The multitasking is top notch. You can run tons of applications at a time. It's really simple to use the gestures and whatnot. It works really, really well, and I'm a big fan. Now, since Palm, of course, who used to make webOS, was bought by HP, they're just now starting to release some new phones. They're starting to get webOS 2 out. They're really moving forward, and they're getting some new stuff. And I'm a huge fan of webOS, and especially after using the Veer for a couple of days. There's some really nice things, if I can turn this on here. There's some really nice things about the Veer and webOS in general, and I'm a huge fan of them. However, it's not perfect. I have found some decent glitchiness and lag and all that kind of stuff, which is really not all that prevalent in iOS and etc. But webOS is a fantastic operating system. And then moving on, I want to talk a little bit about iOS. Of course, this is the operating system that the iPhone, iPod Touch, iPad, they all run. Now, as far as iOS goes, again, it is probably the longest running OS here. It's not really, but it's one of the most mature. Since it's on version 4, they've had lots of time to iron out the kinks, add features, all that kind of stuff. And it definitely shows. You can hand anybody an iPod or an iPhone. They turn it on, just swipe to unlock, tap on whatever app that you want to go to. It's just as simple as that. iOS is very centered around user-friendliness and getting you to where you need to be when you need to be there. Now, on the other hand, though, iOS is a bit stale. Of course, there are some things that you can do. You can multitask finally and that kind of stuff. But when you look at webOS, which is absolutely fantastic multitasking, when you look at Android, which has widgets, which has a lot more openness, you can download all kinds of stuff. And when you look at the fantastic version, the fantastic OS and UI of Windows Phone 7, you can see that iOS is getting a little bit stale. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what they put out in iOS 5. Now moving on, we can talk really briefly about Android. Android, of course, is all over the place. You can't go anywhere without finding an Android this and Android that. Android's all over the place. Now, if you're not familiar with what Android really is, put simply, it's Google's phone OS. So Google's created an OS. It's currently on version 2.3 right now. And they've done a lot of stuff with it. It's got a nice UI. It's very open, so you can do all kinds of crazy stuff like download applications that Apple would never dream of letting you do. And there's also a lot of really cool things about Android that allows you to do some nice stuff, like have phones with keyboards, have phones without keyboards, phones with 2-inch screens, phones with 4.5-inch screens. There's a wide variety of hardware that you can get Android on, and that makes it a fantastic choice for a lot of people. Now, the last one I want to talk about is Windows Phone 7. Now, this is Microsoft's, even though it's technically the 7th version, really it's a brand new from scratch operating system. Now, if you've never tried Windows Phone 7, I highly recommend you do so. As far as just the overall UI and the way it works, it's very, very unique. So, instead of like for webOS or iOS or something like this right here, it's very, very cool as it allows you to have a, I believe they call it the Metro UI, where it's a very stylized and very interesting looking operating system to use. Now, there are some downsides to Windows Phone 7. Now, while it's on several carriers and they're starting to develop, if you're looking for like a phone with really something specific like a 4.3-inch screen or this or that, you're going to probably need to look to Android, because Windows Phone 7 is just now getting started. There are only a handful of Windows Phone 7 devices on the market, but there's a lot to like about it, and it's certainly one of my favorite operating systems to use. Okay, so for the second segment of D3 Live, I'll be taking live questions from everyone in the chat. So as always, every episode of D3 Live is filmed in front of a live audience. We've got quite a few people in the room right now, so let's just take some questions. What are the best features of Windows Phone 7? Well, in my opinion, the #1 feature is the UI. It's a very, very unique UI, and I wish I don't have one on hand to show you guys, but just definitely look it up and take a look at some pictures and video, or better yet, try to take a look at one in person. It's a really unique UI. It's very smooth, very fluid. It's really nothing like the Android and iOS and all the devices that we currently use right now. So That's the number one feature. It just looks totally different. There are also some nice things that I think that where it's headed right now. Like, for example, it's going to be getting better multitasking. It just got cut, copy, and paste. So there's a lot of reasons why Windows Phone 7 is really taking off in a good direction. Is webOS the Hostler Zero friendly? If so, would you recommend it to him? Yes, the Hostler Zero is actually here, amazingly enough. Yeah, the webOS is really friendly for a lot of people. I mean, I've seen some people who are kind of like a little intimidated, like it seems complicated and stuff, but it's absolutely not. And in fact, one of the great things I love about webOS is that there's no home button. There's no buttons of any really type as far as except for, your lock and your volume rocker and everything. And that's because everything's using gestures. So, for example, let's say I'm using this and I'm in the browser, so I want to go back. Well, instead of looking for a button or something, I just swipe on the bottom little gesture area, goes back. Let's say I want to change a different application, just swipe up, the card comes up, and then I can go scroll between them. So there's a lot of really nice user-friendly things, and that's one of the things I love. I mean, there's no buttons, there's no even capacitive buttons. I mean, you just swipe. It's just the most natural thing in the world. So yeah, I absolutely do love webOS. And while of course it's not perfect either, as far as the general, the core of it, the usability is absolutely rock solid. Can you install Android on an iOS device? Yes, you can under certain circumstances. So yeah, you can install Android, and there's my dog. You can install Android on an iPhone 2G, on an iPhone 3G, or an iPod Touch first generation. It's called the iDroid project, so you guys can feel free to Google that and get all the information. But you can run it on certain devices, and I know they're working on trying to get Android up on all kinds, so definitely some pretty cool stuff. Which one is the most stable? Now that's actually a great question. Of course, it's very, very important. As much as I love webOS, it's certainly not the most stable operating system in the world. Windows Phone 7 is not half bad, but I think iOS is probably going to be the best. Just because it's been around for so long, they've had lots of time to work out all the little bugs and issues and all that kind of stuff. I've been an iOS user for several years now, and it was not that bad, 3 years ago, and it's even better now. So I would say iOS is probably the most stable, albeit probably the most boring one. If I was buying a new phone today for under $250, what would I recommend with the following OSs? Now that's a really difficult question. I mean, every person's taste is vary. I mean, for example, do you want a landscape keyboard? Do you want no keyboard at all? Do you want a small screen, large screen? What carrier? There's a ton of different factors, and I really just can't say there's one particular phone or there's one particular OS that's way better than all of them, and that's everyone who's watching this video should get it. But I think that they each do have their pros and cons. For example, like iOS, if you want an iPhone but you want a physical keyboard, nope, nothing you can do there. If you want a webOS phone with like a 4.3-inch display, there's nothing you can do there. So I just really recommend take a look at the different carrier options that you have, whatever carrier that you're on. Take a look at what kind of features are most important to you, and kind of go from there. So anyway, guys, that's about it for this week's episode of D3Live. I'd like to thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, feel free to subscribe. There's a subscribe button up there that I graciously put just for you guys. But anyway, guys, if you're interested in learning more about D3Live, feel free to subscribe. I do this every week, Saturday at 3 o'clock Eastern Time, and I post a video right before I go live. So if you want, you can watch the show live in the chat, and everyone's, of course, love it because it's awesome, right? Or, of course, you can watch the pre-recorded episodes on YouTube.